I suppose I wanted to start with the point of view that we're calling this debate secularism and the Muslim question. And in a way, I think that sort of reinforces the notion that it is about the Muslim question. And I'm not so sure it is. And I think that actually we should just widen this debate and recognise that we're in this discussion for a number of reasons. Not just because of the rise of the Muslim question in the public sphere, as it were, but because of a couple of other things which are happening across the world. The first and most obvious trend is that we've seen over the last 40 years a growth in multi-faith societies on a scale we have never seen before. We've always had people of different faith in societies, but we haven't had anything like the growth of multi-faith societies in the last 40 years. And accompanying that, of course, is people are on the move across the world on a scale we've never seen before as well. 200 million people now live outside the country in which they were born. So this movement, this, in many ways, disintegration of national boundaries is something which is underpinning all of this, along with the rise of diaspora communities, as Jonathan Sachs made the point. So even if you haven't got a multi-faith society and a modern democratic framework, then you certainly have got a multi-faith world at your doorstep through the rise of diaspora communities. And the other thing that's changed, it seems to me, is that decision-taking frameworks within all modern democratic societies has also changed fundamentally in the last 30, 40 years. So I think we have to sort of look beyond the immediate debate about the Muslim community. And the other thing that struck me is that actually there is no accepted definition of secularism. Just looking through all the papers, it's extremely difficult to get a consensus about what secularism is. Either in theoretical terms or government terms. That terms like secular society, secular government, secular state just seem to be conflated in just about anything you read, trying to disentangle them. And I was really grateful to Tariq for trying at least to get some sort of different model associated with the notion of secularism. So I suppose I'm going to put forward my own distinction, which is a little bit more simple. And I'm just simply going to try and distinguish secular society from secular governance. And I'm going to argue that the idea of a secular society in a modern democratic framework, whilst being conceptually sound, actually is neither desirable nor attainable. But on the other hand, the notion of secular governance, which is also something which we can conceptualize, is desirable. And not only is it desirable, it is inevitable. It is happening around us. And I think that the notion of a secular society is untenable for a number of reasons. Firstly, because, as I've said, we are now, all modern democracies are multi-faith and multicultural. And culture is so entwined with faith that separation is just simply not possible in any feasible way. And some people argue, of course, that they are the same thing. Again, I think in Tariq's paper he alludes to that. Secondly, the principles of free speech, freedom of association, freedom of observance and practice are so embedded and inherently part of the principles of democracy that, again, it's just not possible to separate them out. I suppose as a consequence, therefore, faith is very much within the public sphere. And in fact, that's another definitional point, because I couldn't find a good definition of what we meant by the public sphere or the public square. There doesn't seem to be a lot of consensus about that. But certainly in the sense that we would expect people with deeply held beliefs, whether they are faith or non-faith based beliefs, to be able to argue their point of view within a democratic framework, and to see, in this case, religious leaders making points which represent their own particular points of view. And of course, within modern democratic societies, as Rabbi Solomon pointed out, faith is visible anyway. It's visible within public buildings, churches, mosques, gurdwaras. It is visible within religious dress and all sorts of other symbols. They're not in any way confined to the to the private sphere, even though in some countries like France, of course, they have attempted to at least limit them within public institutions as opposed to public space. And faith communities are celebrated within the public sphere. In fact, receive public monies. Christmas lights, for example, paid for out of public funds. Diwali lights paid for out of public funds. Already that is the case. And there is an aspect of support from public funds, which is actually not so much about support for faith or religion. It is actually about support for the manifestation of that as an aspect of diversity, recognizing that faith actually creates and enriches diversity. So I just think that to talk of a secular society in a modern democratic framework is just simply untenable. No modern democratic society is, in any sense, secular. But, as I said earlier, I think secular governance is an entirely different matter. It is not only desirable, but it is inevitable as well. And this is because multi-faith societies obviously not only include people from different faiths, but also people of non-faith and people of who hold different beliefs which are not necessarily faith-based. And that means, and I probably do take issue here with Tariq, that means that to give one a sense of priority over another is to privilege one group over another, whether that's between faiths or between faiths and non-faiths. And I really think that the comparison with sport and opera is just not a fair one. In fact, actually, you can get challenged for spending too much money on opera compared with sport, and those sorts of challenges do happen. We hear that it's unfair, that all those upper-class people are getting all the money to go to Covent Garden, and why isn't it being put into grassroots sport? So any perception of unfairness in the public realm will inevitably be seen as privileging one group over another. But bearing in mind what I said earlier, that faith groups are inevitably associated with cultural distinctions, and therefore in privileging faith, we are actually talking about privileging whole communities. And that is a huge distinction, I think. And it's why I believe that disestablishment of the Church of England is inevitable. And in fact, only today I see that somebody's tabled a private member's bill calling for an end to the problem of Catholics ascending to the throne, and that is an inherent and unjustified unfairness which has to be addressed. And I think, as someone said, that we do have a very weak established church, so to some extent it's neither here nor there, but I do think that it's inevitably going to be eroded away. So I think even the perception, and this is varying on the recent debate about the revenge agenda as much as anything else, even the perception that the government is talking to one community more than another immediately creates the perception amongst others that this is unfair, that this community is exercising undue influence over the governmental system, and that we want our share as well. And of course, non-faith groups saying that they also want to be around the table and have perversely, in my view, been given a place at the table as though they were a faith. But I think there's a much more fundamental issue here, which is why we are going to inevitably end up with a system of secular governance. And that is because decision-taking in modern democratic societies has to have some evidential, objective, rational basis.